Hello, everybody. Welcome to White Line Fever Live. We are back, and again, Brian Carney said, make sure you sell at the start of the program. So we've got a very special guest. But first, I want to tell you that tied in with our guest at in the shop, which is at WLFmerchandise.com or shop.stevemascord.com. All Kiwi gear is 15% off with the code Big O. I haven't set it up yet. I'm going to do it after the show, so don't go there now. But all New Zealand gear, just about to post a singlet off now, a Kiwi training singlet now, 15% off with the code Big O. And don't forget to support us on Patreon and read the show notes if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening, then look at them on the bottom of your phone screen while you're listening to us chat. And that has given away who our guest is. It is the author of from a rugby league perspective, I would call it a bestseller. He'll be able to tell us that. Big O, the story of Olsen Filipaina. It's Patrick Skene. Hello, Patrick.
G'day, Steve. How are you?
I'm good, mate. Did you like that sort of bit of capitalism? It doesn't come naturally, but I'm doing my best.
I know. You've got to turn a quid, and I think it's the closest capitalism to your heart, rugby league shirts. So you haven't wandered too far. Yeah.
Well, we'll probably get into how close and far rugby league travels to our heart and away from it during this little half-hour chat, Patrick. But how has the book been going? Obviously, you got a lot of publicity. Book's got its own website. I was just looking at you on Fox Sports before we came on, and you've been on the Rugby League Digest as well, which I would expect to have a pretty huge following. So, how's the book going?
Good. We've gone into reprint, and we're reasonably close to what New York Times would call a bestseller. Mm-hmm. In rugby league terms, as you know, there's a very herky-jerky market for books. Sometimes a book will come out of nowhere, and it's more paying tribute to the player rather than the quality of the writing, and half of them don't get read. And then you have books like Joe Gorman's Rugby League Explains Queensland, which is a Michelangelo piece of work, and didn't sell anywhere near some of the direct player autobiographies. So it's a funny market. I'm lucky enough to have Olsen alive and being able to carry the load. And people are quite shocked when they meet him because he's like Father Time. He was someone that was there very young in our lives, and people's eyes bulge when they see him because he's only about 5'8" now. He seems to be the shrinking man. But I'm just overjoyed to have access to a man I believe is a national living treasure in rugby league and in the Australian-New Zealand relationship. His dismantling King Wally for me sits with the underarm in the folklore between the two countries, and he's still a Garbo. So I'm honoured to be his scribe and tell his story and bring it from the margins and where it was laboured with some stereotypes that I have really in the book argued to dismantle and put him not in Mount Rushmore, but in a very unique place.
Very well said. Now, mate, I heard that when you first came up with this idea, it was because of a story which was on the Guardian website, which got an enormous number of views, and you started work on it, and your publisher wanted to change the project fundamentally. Is that right?
Yeah, they halfway through they said, we really love the social history side of the Pacific Revolution, which the book has three parts to it. It has Olsen, it has the Pacific Revolution, of which you have actually the best quote of all in the book about the Pacific Revolution and it being in rugby league's DNA to rob from the rich and redistribute wealth to the poor. And it's a quote that a lot of people have come to me about and said that just sums it up. Rugby league's, the Robin Hood of sports. And it really sets off the Pacific Revolution chapter. But you've got Olsen's story, you've got the Pacific Revolution, and I've also tried to create it as a textbook for cultural competence on how to get the best out of Polynesian and Melanesian players who are, by latest estimate, 48% of the league, plus 12% Aboriginal, who operate on the same principles. So 60% of the NRL now is regional Indigenous. And the money ball move in rugby league, you can't win a premiership unless you're culturally competent as a coach and as an organisation. And I talked to a lot of player agents, and they said the 3 clubs players are prepared to play for unders and they advise their clients to go towards are Bellamy, Robinson, and Bennett. They're the 3 culturally competent coaches that took over the mantle from Graham Lowe, who was one of the pioneers, and Graham Lowe learned everything from Jack Gibson about personalised man management and being the priest, being the father, being the doctor, being the friend, just really moulding themselves around the player to get the best out of that player. And there's a big part of the book's about Frank Stanton and his mistreatment of Olsen. Whereas in today's world of players being an asset under management, where it's all customised, Frank Stanton, just really flogged Olsen to the gristle and didn't get the best out of him, would shout at him. So I've tried to provide a textbook. The NRL have bought 60 for all of their staff. So they're using it as a textbook on cultural competence and empathy, which have just sort of sprung up as being almost the crucial parts of a head coach's operations now. To you can't win a premiership unless you're culturally competent. It's there in front of our eyes now.
I don't want to sort of bore listeners and viewers with, here's me just about to finish a book talking to another guy who's got a book out and asking about the business too much. But I just wondered, it sounds like, and it looks like to me that this has kind of become your job. And when the book first came out, you had no idea how it was going to sell or how much reward there would be in it for you. What was involved in the decision to sort of jump in both feet into doing this sort of promo and to being a kind of accomplished and broad speaker on the subject, as opposed to, hey, I've just done a book, now I'll go and do another book, or now I'll go and write a feature for someone, or you know what I mean? Like, what made you decide to sort of be so committed to it?
Well, there's a permission piece that started for me in 2006. I started my own company working with 100 multicultural communities across Sydney, doing a lot of sport. And I ran the first ever official Pacific community engagement for kids program with the NRL back in 2007. So I've been working with the Pacific community a long time. And then, it's basically the step. I was writing for The Guardian, and my original plan with The Guardian was to write 20 articles, and whichever one took off, I would step up out of sort of 2020 and move towards Test match and take the plunge. Olsen's went wild. It was, I think, the second biggest story in The Guardian that year, produced by, and it just reverberated through Facebook, where a lot of League and Polynesian and Māori people, that's their platform, and they shared it like crazy. No one knew about the racism. Olsen just disappeared in 1980 from New Zealand, and no one really knew much about him. There's a big gulf between our countries, a lot bigger gulf than, particularly back then. We weren't trading partners. And so I just took that step, and I was also rolled. Olsen was my hero. I remember him. My Irish grandmother lived in Lilyfield, and we would walk to the hill with our cardboard to slide down the back of the Leichhardt Hill, and it was Larry Corowa, Wayne Wigham, and Olsen that I found the most exciting players. And I remember the whole hill would stand up. I didn't know what was going on. Whenever Olsen or Larry got the ball, the whole hill just would stand up in unison. Plus, they were different. I grew up in Anglo-Australia, and these guys were offering something different, a different look, a different feel. Olsen always played with a smile. And I just fell in love with the guy. But I've sat in 1,000 pubs, as you have, and just heard the guy just derided as an enigma that didn't get it, lazy. And it didn't marry with what I saw of him. I saw him devastate defences. I thought he was amazing. So like a forensic detective, I dug down and went through every single rugby league week. You've been in the museum there, where you just got to go through every big league, every rugby league week, talk to everybody.
I've got them all in my storeroom, mate. They're all in my storeroom. I don't need to go to the museum. I do have to go to Sydney, which is 20,000 kilometres away, but
Yeah, you spent time there at some stage. You've gone through the process, and it's unmistakable the trends that come out of it. And of the 5 times he was known as a reserve grader, only played 107 or 108, which is still a good career. He spent more time in reserves than he should have. But 4 of the 5 times he was dropped were for disciplinary reasons. They weren't for form reasons. And Frank Stanton was one of those guys. He'd put you down in reserves for 9 weeks. He was, having these mental battles with players to try and break them to his way. And it's just not the best way to get good form out of a Polynesian. And once you've lost one of these guys from shouting or abusing or a racist jibe, you never get them back. And there's some coaches now we won't name who've gone very poorly in the last 10 years, who've been culturally incompetent. They've lost the Polynesians. And that's it. The performance is impacted.
There's so many rabbit holes now. I'm at an intersection of rabbit holes.
Yeah.
But Frank Stanton's a guy who, I always got on well with, and he was always very nice to me. How did you, and again, unfortunately, I'm not in a position to have read the book, which is, I guess, good in a way, because we're hopefully going to sell it. I'm hopefully going to sell it, so it'll be fresh to me.
Yep.
When it's available, and I'll be able to talk about it as I read it, but on social media. But how did you go about dealing with that, where you've got the main subject of your book is telling you a story about someone which is a bit uncomplimentary, perhaps? How do you deal with that? Do you try to make contact with Frank? Does he, how do you, and I guess I'm asking that as a journalist and an author. I hope it's as interesting to the viewers and listeners as it is to me, the answer. But how do you deal with it?
It was one of the worst phone calls of my life, to be honest, that I'll give absolute kudos to Frank for stepping into the breach and agreeing to speak. So I'll absolutely respect him for that. And I'll also note that other players I spoke to or read about thought Frank was the greatest influence in their life and one of the greatest coaches. So he's been very polarizing. And there was a lot I had to remove or legal removed in this book about that time at Balmain as well. Frank, basically early into the phone call, basically said I was trying to accuse him of being racist. So that was a very uncomfortable moment. And Frank's about the same age as my father, so I kind of felt I had my dad in the dock as well. Because, there was a very common theme was ignorance and fear of what we don't understand and the outsiders. And you throw in a 70-year White Australia policy and just pumping Anglos up to be the chosen ones and everyone else to be inferior. And you get the products of that, of people distrust outsiders, don't think outsiders are as good, treat them as interlopers. And Frank wasn't good to Queenslanders either, whether it was dropping Wally or, running Queenslanders out of the Balmain team. He was just into Sydney Rugby League. And we've just seen a bunch of decisions that have come out of Sydney Rugby League that show that we're never too far from the myopia and just the being in love with your own backyard so much you think everyone else is provincial bumpkins.
Yeah, and that's actually what I was going to go to, and it's an annoying subject to me to even think about at the moment, the whole World Cup thing. But the one thing rugby league may take from the rich and give to the poor, as far as state of origin is concerned, and the way our international regulations go, but that creates a product which can be sold by I don't know if we call them I guess we call them the rich. They're in charge. They're running things. So, as I said to someone recently trying to explain on Reddit, once you free the mill workers from the tyranny of the pit owners, you can become their new pit owner as long as you just give them a few shillings. And I see that being repeated in international rugby league, particularly where we've given people a certain level of agency and it's become profitable, and now we're just trying to hoard the profits, just like the people we gave them agency from, and it is a disturbing time when 85% of players surveyed said they wanted to come to the World Cup, and that the New Zealand particularly, who are in the financial control of the ARLC, and the ARLC, basically step in before too many players speak up and make a decision for them, and then drive that home by having their employers, not threaten them, but certainly show disapproval of any intention to represent their countries. It is a dark time, and we're so far back in our journey that all other sports are looking at us in the rearview mirror, aren't they? What do you think?
Yeah, I watched the 100 today, Birmingham versus Wales, that 100 cricket thing. The stands were full. They were dancing. And I believe the Northern English crowds would have come out in an extraordinary way to support this, as I think it was you that tweeted that, the Aboriginal Māori team, if they were able to, I don't know, it's not ideal and in line with UN classification of a country, but just as a, little COVID one-off, and they would have been greeted like liberators. And we've all seen when the Americans marched into Paris in 44, it's one of the great moments of people appreciating what another group of people have done. And, we could have had something really, really special to continue on, because unfortunately Peter V'landys and Andrew Abdo, I don't think they had the experience you had out in New Zealand reporting on, or just reporting on and knowing what you know and what that Tonga, the rise of Tonga actually means, the whole context of it. Unless you're a true lover of the international game, it looks like a threat. It looks like a threat to the established order. It looks like we have created a Frankenstein in our midst that's risen up from our own bosom to threaten us, rather than thinking we've won the thing 10 times. The best thing that could have ever happened to inject, value back into the Kangaroos brand would be for it to be beaten in a World Cup. But they don't see that. They're so hell-bent on this global domination piece. And Phil Gould's tweet, for me, I mean, that's it. They so disrespect the board. I mean, imagine the All Blacks said, we're going to basically effectively kibosh a World Cup. You can't play it without our brand. It's not the real thing, because we don't agree with the people. We don't respect the people of the IRB. It is absolutely preposterous what has happened. And Phil Gould said it, and I love him, I hate him, whatever. He's the messenger, and he called himself the messenger, and he said, don't shoot the messenger in this tweet, where he said, they basically want to collapse the International Rugby League current infrastructure. So that's the level it's gotten to, where the guy that's got the ear of Peter V'landys, and V'landys used thought we were back in the convict colony, as if we were somehow treating the NRL like second-class citizens. It's like, mate, pony up to the World Cup. We just love the Olympics because.
Mate, I've lost sound. I don't know if you can hear me, but you've gone very quiet. The other thing is, he used the word to talk about if the Aboriginal team came over here. He actually used the word incarceration to describe their quarantine when they got back. It went through to the keeper, but I just thought it was a very poor choice of words, and it was about being emotive. It was about the stuff that has served him well in racing, where he's like, let's take on Melbourne. And it's all adversarial. His entire way of marshalling support is adversarial. And unfortunately, rugby league's been caught up in it now. The difference is, and I was talking to a friend of mine who talked about the Denver test, and I'm just going to talk a little bit and hopefully your sound comes back, but talking about the Denver test, and the NRL clubs saw the players in 2018, the New Zealand and England players, as their IP. We're not going to let a promoter come and take our IP and make money off them. And that speaks to the heart of this issue too, that they see, 70% of players from the Southern Hemisphere as their IP, and they see a World Cup in England as someone making money off their employees, their IP, which completely ignores the agency of these players in all three competition, men, women, and wheelchair, to represent their country, which is something that, remember, here's a word we haven't heard since the 80s, primacy. Remember, there used to be a saying, the primacy of international football, the primacy of representative football. It's a dead word. It's it's a word I haven't heard around rugby league for 30 years. And it's the immaturity of the game to even judge itself by other sports, the game in the Southern Hemisphere in Australia, to actually look at what other sports are doing and saying, well, actually, they're the standards that apply to us as well. No, we're special, we're better, we're bigger, we don't need to do what those other sports do. It's extremely damaging, but it's something in the game's DNA, and it's something that often makes me feel like I don't want to really devote the rest of my life to it, you know?
Yeah, no, I fully understand that. And I had a moment of pause. Thank God the Olympics were there just to absorb my angst. I mean, I'd say 85% of the rugby league community wanted to help their mates in England out of anyone that's ever been involved in an event. I mean, I was my company was in charge of the marketing for the 2017 Rugby League World Cup, and we got about 19,000 Lebanese to Sydney Stadium, and there was about 2,000 Kangaroos fans. It was embarrassing. So they've seen that, and they've just seen that International Rugby League, wasn't that sizzling in Sydney. And it's like, well, if you'd brought your 19,000 fans, Kangaroos, we would have had 38,000 fans there, and that's a humming Sydney football stadium. So we've seen a depreciation, and there's also a drinking of the Kool-Aid. When you are the NBA, when you are the EPL, when you are the NRL, when you're the leading league, it becomes your property. It becomes, I remember, it was a really interesting time, but I remember the EPL calling when Tim Cahill was coming across, and they were calling our A-League or our doctors over here, witch doctors. And that was a little sting of like looking down at Australian round ball. And now we look down on England. It used to be you played, a season, you alternated between Sydney and UK seasons, and it was great. And we saw Sterlo, and English jerseys used to be sold in Australia as I leaf through old rugby league weeks. And but even if they have been weak, don't be condescending towards them. They're your partners, Northumbria. We need it for the health and strength of rugby league, or it might spread to London, but the heartland, the dirty old town, Salford, and just up in Cumbria and across the Hull. I mean, that has to be preserved as well, in light of a whole range of competitive and socioeconomic challenges. But don't be condescending to your partner. I mean, England and Australia are partners, and also be respectful for HQ. India in cricket is very respectful for England, even though it dwarfs it on the economic side. It's very respectful for England because it's headquarters. And we don't, for a lot of people, it started in 1908, and they lose the principles of the why of rugby league as the only game ever founded on a principle. And if you don't count the English experience, you don't really know what you're playing for and why it exists.
Here's my deep concerns, getting towards the end of the book of two tribes, is that rugby league was created for people who couldn't afford to play rugby. Basically, they couldn't afford time off work. In Australia, it was created for people who wanted to get a piece of the pie. They didn't want the people running the rugby competitions to keep all the money, right? The people who otherwise, didn't have great means. It's still selling itself to the descendants in both places of those people. And the AB demographic in both places is already occupied by rugby union. So it actually, it's just in a terminal tailspin. It's just going round and round and round. It can't, in the places it relies on to pay the bills each day, its path upwards is blocked and permanently blocked. And everyone is fighting over the existing money. So every time we try to go to a new place and reach people who are unaware of the history and judge the sport on its merits, we basically shun them. We give them a taste and we get rid of them because we can't share the loot. We won't share the loot. And it's just such it is such an ingrained thing in rugby league that I don't see it ever being resolved. And therefore, I think I find myself going down the path of it not being worthy of my time, because I just can't see any path for progress. That's the way I feel.
Yeah. I have that exact feeling. I have mitigated that this year by devoting my time at Tier 2. So I've been following every home game of the Kaiviti Silktails, the new Fiji team, the Rongmassi Cup. That has filled me with joy. Every Hanson Park game has filled me with joy. I've been to every North Sydney home game that I could. That's filled me with joy. I went down and saw Gerringong versus Kiama built a whole family holiday around that and just felt absolute joy. So my love of rugby league, I'm just having to drill one layer below NRL and international right now, which is on hold. I've had to get my meaning, I've had to drill one layer below, and it's been just absolutely wonderful for me. It's been soul affirming. So I still love the game. I'm not a journalist. I'm a writer as such. I am interested in pioneers and breakthrough stories. That's my core interest. So I don't have to. I'm not on the beat. I don't have to. As soon as I saw Phil Gould's tweet, for me, that was cathartic. It was like, it's not about this ridiculous COVID nonsense that we're being spoon-fed and wouldn't pass the pub test, that you charged out against all doctors' advice to restart the game and lauded yourself as the one. Some people stretched it out to say they were responsible for the Olympics. If rugby league hadn't gone so early and provided that front runner template for other sports. To go from that guy to rugby union, the 100 is playing right now, union, and we are the shyest, most health-conscious, risk-averse code in the world in the matter of 12 months. It's just too much of a stretch, and we're being fed this. They've been in the bubble, player fatigue. What about letting wheelchair and women go? Or what about treating it like a military mission where only single men get asked first, and we know family guys are going to be in the bubble eternally. There are some people who just want to play for their country, who have been brought up that in all sports playing for your country is the highest honour, and would give anything to do what the Boomers just did, a disparate group of guys coming together, the Italians. So yeah, it's blown my mind. And at least we know it's about some higher power play and nothing to do with the doctor saying someone will definitely catch COVID. I mean, what absolute gibberish is that, to say it definitively?
Yep, it's a hostile takeover. There's no doubt. Okay, before we go, Patrick, where can people find you? I don't want people necessarily to buy the book off anyone else if we're going to have a chat after this about me stocking it. But where can people follow you, and where can they read about the Big O?
TheBigO.kiwi is the website, and we will stock some with you, Steve, to service that UK market. And I've written this. This is a love letter to rugby league, and it's also a love letter to England for starting this game that I love as well. So there's a big tribute to those 22 men who came together in 1895 and took the plunge for something we're still getting extraordinary delight from today. So from a big chunk of Australians, we love what England brings to the table, and we align with the Northmen in values and stoic principles, and that's why I don't like what's just recently happened. Is so out of alignment with the fundamentals of rugby league. But the BigO.kiwi, if you're in Australia, and White Line Fever, just keep following Steve, because he'll have some copies jettisoned there very soon.
It's been a pleasure. It's a surprise that we've never spoken before. I don't know how that happened, but a real pleasure. And we're going to stop the live stream now and have a bit of a chat off air. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. If you enjoyed the interview, how about you follow the channel on Facebook, on whatever channel you're watching. And, if you're listening, then please subscribe on Apple. And